It's been a little while since I did a solo episode here on the Maker's Playbook, and I've been having a lot of conversations lately with makers as everyone gears up for the holiday sale season. The DMs on Instagram are blowing up with all the pain points of self-employment, like the overwhelm of shipping, which, sorry, this episode does not have a solution for that at this point, and the dream of photography not taking so long. Now that I do have a solution for. So if you haven't already downloaded our photography cheat sheet, then you need to stop this episode right now, set the packaging tape aside, pull over the car, whatever it is, just hit pause and click the link in the description of this episode to download our easy to implement, no matter what kind of camera or cell phone you are using, 3-step process to better photos faster. Now, after that's done, perhaps most of all, the underlying feeling from all of these conversations is the pesky anxiety of, will I sell anything? Will people like what I've made? Will they pay me for it? Or will they argue the price? As so many of you know, often Q4 is when makers do the bulk of their sales. Our businesses mimic the flow of retail stores in a lot of ways, whether we like it or not. And with knowing this time of year is such a huge opportunity, there can come some not so great mental side effects. Because what if your online shop isn't blowing up right now? What if you aren't sold out? Maybe you've only made a sale or two. Maybe not any. Maybe like us, me and Francesco here on the other side of the microphone, a million other factors in life have gotten in the way, and your dreams of a huge inventory stock to sell for this holiday season just isn't going to happen. What does it all mean? Well, that terrible word sales is exactly what I want to talk about on today's solo episode of the Maker's Playbook. I'm your host, Rebecca Iges-Cara. For those of you that have been following along to our little slice of the podcast world since the beginning, you know that I mentioned I'd be doing these solo episodes every once in a while in order to connect some of the common themes coming up in our interviews. And while this exact topic hasn't quite been discussed, it feels to me like it's been lurking under the surface. As we've chatted with other makers, talking about how they've built their businesses, there's one thing that just must be true without anyone directly saying it. They found people who like the work they make and manage to make enough of that work and sell enough of that work to make a living. But how does that work? Because the one common statement right from our very first interview episode with Camille Beckles of Camille at the Wheel, all the way through to Simon Levin on episode 108, or most recently with Rosa Vinland Holmes on episode 203, all of them have emphasized the importance of making the work you love first and worrying about sales second. Otherwise, all of the love and joy is sucked right out if you're just making the work that you can sell as opposed to the work that you enjoy. And none of them are wrong. But if you're preparing to quit your full-time job and go all in on being a self-employed artist, well, then those sales are awfully important also. Last time I checked, Visa wouldn't accept my favorite ceramic piece full of my heart and soul as payment for my credit card statement. So what does it mean if you found your style, you love the pieces you're making, but you're hearing crickets on the other side of the internet cash register? Does it mean no one liked your pieces? Does it mean you have to go back to making mugs like everybody else, even though you absolutely, unequivocally hate handles? No, my friend, it does not. If you're not selling enough of your work, it doesn't mean that no one likes your work. And while we're at it, your sales, or lack thereof, are also not a reflection of your self-worth. All it means, and if you've been multitasking this whole time, I want you to pause just for a minute and have you come back to fully listening just for this moment, because I want you to hear this loud and clear. Your sales or lack thereof, are not a reflection of the value of your work. They are a reflection of your marketing knowledge, or lack thereof. When I first started my business over 11 years ago, I remember meeting a rather well-known photographer. He'd photographed celebrity weddings and spoke at professional conferences since he was pretty well respected. And he had this incredible skill for capturing fleeting moments. And I remember learning about a year after meeting him that he was applying for bankruptcy. Now, in reflecting on this story while I was writing this podcast, I realized that a person might apply for bankruptcy for a number of reasons. But to my brain, in that moment 10 years ago, it meant one thing. It meant that no matter how good you were at your craft, if you were going to be self-employed, if you were going to be a small business owner, it meant you also needed to be good at business. The rest of the world didn't understand that he was exponentially better than my newbie camera-holding self. All they saw was his painfully outdated website versus my fresh, bubbly, personality-filled website. If you're thinking about hiring someone to come photograph your wedding, do you want the guy with the sepia-toned brown website? Or do you want the girl whose face you can see on the About page and who states how much she loves what she does and will gladly help ease the stress of all of this crazy wedding planning? For anybody that's ever gotten married, I'm thinking the choice is probably pretty obvious. Now, before I get carried away here, I want to be clear. I am not suggesting that you don't practice your craft. I'm going to assume for the rest of this podcast episode that we all respect and value not only the craft of ceramics, but our own integrity and want to improve our skills as potters and makers. If for no other reason than our own self-respect, we will continue to improve those skills even if the people buying from us already think what we created a couple of years ago was pretty amazing. Right? Okay. Wanted to make sure we're on the same page for that. Because there's obviously a completely different conversation we could have about sales and value when it comes to the craftsmanship of your work. I'm not suggesting that you settle for making a poorly weighted, awkwardly handled mug and focus your efforts solely on learning how to sell that mug for $50. That would be disingenuous. That is why people hate sales and marketing. But what I am saying is that the general population, the people who are not obsessed with the ways of clay or making art the way you and I are, the people who you are presumably more than likely trying to get to buy your pieces, those regular people do not know why your mug is any different from mine, which is any different from Leach pottery. Why should they pay $75 for a mug made by a ceramicist with 30 years of experience when I'm selling one for $40 that clearly states it's also wheel thrown and handmade? Not to mention, why should they buy mine for $40 when there's a funny mug with a clever saying on it at Target for $20? If you're struggling with selling enough of your work, it's less about improving your skills in clay and more a matter of understanding marketing and sales, both of which I feel like are four-letter words when I use them around artists. People immediately start looking at me differently when I start this conversation. It's like talking about sales or marketing somehow lessens the integrity of the art. But here's the deal. You have to get comfortable with sales and marketing. Or rather, I should say, if you want to one day quit the day job and go full-time with making a living from the things you make, then you have to get comfortable with sales and marketing. Your only other alternative that I know of would be to get sponsored by a gallery or an agent. And then you have the whole conundrum of losing commission percentages and the rest of that whole business model. So you might not really love that side of it in exchange for giving up having to learn sales and marketing. If you aren't worried about making a living from the things you make, well, then you probably accidentally clicked the wrong podcast. And this entire conversation so far has been incredibly boring for you. It's okay if you want to stop now and turn on NPR instead. I will completely understand. Okay, so back to the topic at hand, the dirty words of sales and marketing. So here's the thing, all of it, sales, marketing, business, can really be boiled down to one big experiment. You have a theory. Let's say people like buying mugs. And you test that theory by making some mugs in your own unique style and putting them online for the world to see. You see if that theory is right or wrong, based upon whether or not people bought your mugs. If you sold a few, your theory is sound. You might want to try a little bit more to increase, but it looks like it's promising. People like the mugs. If you sold out, your theory is spot on. Congratulations, you've found your audience, and if you like making mugs, you found a good fit between your art and the marketplace. But if you didn't sell as many mugs as you had hoped for or needed to, well, here's where the scientific method gets a little murky. Because if you did not sell as many mugs as you wanted, it doesn't necessarily mean people don't like your work. It could just mean that whatever audience you focused on doesn't want mugs right now. If you tried to sell your mugs to a different audience, maybe the results would be different. And that is where the experiment repeats itself. You can take your mugs to a different audience and try again. See what the results are, come up with another theory from that experience, rinse and repeat. Or you can keep the same audience from the beginning and try making something else. Maybe they love sets of bowls or singular serving plates. Either way, in the perfect world, you change one variable at a time. Test, gather data, and make a new decision to try another variable. And then keep repeating the cycle. Where business starts to feel like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall is when you change things up too frequently and with too many variables all at once to be able to make any kind of informed decision. For example, if you tried selling mugs on Etsy for this holiday season and didn't have much luck, it wouldn't be very informative to then go to the local holiday market and try to sell bowls instead. You've changed two variables at once, the item you're selling and the audience. Instead, it would be smart to try to sell those same mugs at the local market as you had listed on Etsy and see how people respond. Or to list your new bowls on Etsy instead of the mugs and see what happens. Either keep the product the same and change the audience, or change the product and keep the audience. The hard part here, well, at least the hard part for me, is patience. Because you need to try these things for a long enough period of time to actually get some decent feedback. And when I say long enough period of time, I'm not talking like a week. I'm talking closer to 3 months, okay? Posting 3 mugs with 2 different color options on Etsy for one holiday season and trying to make a decision based upon the 5 weeks you had them online isn't going to give you very much information to make a decision on in the future. But testing out those 3 mugs for 6 months over the course of in-person shows, Etsy, Instagram, and whatever else you can find, well, now you'll start to learn something from all of these different audiences. If you can only test in one place, it may feel like no one likes your work. But then if you go to a second location and all of a sudden sell out, now you can't really say no one likes your work, right? This is exactly why when I get emails with questions like, which is better, your own website or Etsy? Or really any question that involves effectively asking, should I do this or should I do that? My answer is never straightforward. It's a matter of what kind of work do you want to make, and therefore what kind of audience do you need to be able to sell that work? And also, more than anything, what do you want your life to actually look like? Different approaches create different realities for our lives. Some people don't mind the introverted experience of spending 2 days boxing up items and sending them out to the post office. Other people would rather spend 2 days driving around the region where they live for different markets and shows. Neither is wrong, but both are very different audiences and very different business models. And side note, if this whole decision-making process sounds overwhelming, if I've completely lost you and you're ready to skip to the next podcast, then I'd suggest that you snag our free quick guide to smart decisions. It will help make all of this quite a bit easier. Grab it at makers-playbook.com/guardrails. Or you can just click the link in the show notes of this podcast episode on whatever app you are listening to. Okay, so step one of all of this is the testing and finding your right audience. Sometimes that can happen quickly, sometimes it takes more time. You want to make sure that it suits your style of work that you want to make, but also the style of business that best serves your life. The second part of all of this that I hear a lot of makers get miserable over is the actual selling process, also known as customer service. And I heard a great quote the other day from online coach Jerisha Hawk. She said, "If you don't want to have conversations with people, you aren't going to make any sales." I literally laughed out loud in the car listening to her on this podcast when she said this, because it's true. And while putting it that way may sound a little harsh to some people, it brings a bit of the added humor needed to say, just do it. Here's the thing, as is true with anything in life, if you don't practice, you're never going to get better at it. For example, let's say you're scared to start selling your work online because you cannot stomach the idea of having a hard conversation with a customer who's disappointed after receiving a piece of yours in the mail. Or the idea of needing to explain to someone the nature of handmade work, or having to refund them because something arrived broken, absolutely puts your stomach in knots. But guess what? You will never learn how to better package your work so that it's safe in the mail if you don't send it out into the hands of the dreaded shipping lords. You won't learn how to improve your client education if you don't field some of those same questions a few times first and realize if everybody has the same question, then maybe you're missing something to explain to them before they make a purchase, right? And trust me when I say, if you're paying attention to your customers' feedback, you can make the process easier and better. Over the course of the last 11 years, I can count on one hand the number of truly difficult customer interactions I've had to navigate. One hand. That means less than 5 times I have had really, really difficult situations or an unhappy client. And that's with roughly 20 weddings per year, plus corporate clients and family portrait sessions. So doing some rough math here and rounding up to make the numbers easy to talk about on an audio-only podcast, let's assume that's over 350 clients. So that's 5 out of 350, which is roughly 1.5%. That's not too shabby if you ask me. But that's not to say more of my clients didn't have questions throughout the process. And this is where we get to the second big takeaway of this podcast episode. So again, if you've been multitasking, pause for just a second and come back to this. All right, are you ready? Takeaway number 1 was that the success of your sales, or lack thereof, is not a reflection of the value of your work. It is a reflection of your marketing knowledge, or lack thereof. And now, takeaway number 2 is this. Questions from customers or potential customers are not a bad thing. They simply show you an opportunity to create a system for education. You see, unless you're trying to sell your work entirely to other potters or makers, then the odds are the people buying from you know very little, if not nothing, about what you're doing. The person sending you a message asking you if you can make them a specific piece they saw on Crate and Barrel or Pinterest doesn't know that it takes months to formulate a specific glaze recipe for a specific color. They don't know that to create a new shape entirely different than what your work usually is actually would take exponentially longer for you to kind of tinker around with the process and learn the new shape and learn any issues that it might have in firing. Not to mention the risk factor in ceramics for breakage during the first firing or issues with glaze and clay fit in the second firing. Your average customer doesn't know about all of this stuff. In fact, if they're anything like my very well-meaning loved ones, they just want to support this crazy new venture of yours and thought that by asking, they were going to be able to support you. It's us artists and makers that take offense because we do know all of these things. But here's the thing. It's our responsibility to figure out ways to educate potential customers. I want to give you a non-pottery, real-life, personal, just recently happened. Maybe I'm still a little annoyed by it, so it's a little early to share, but I'm going to share anyway. Example. If you follow me on Instagram, then you probably know that Francesco and I bought a house that is very much a fixer-upper. In other words, it needs a lot of work. Much of that work we're doing ourselves, but there's some things we just don't have the skill set or the time for, like installing new kitchen cabinets. So naturally, we call around to a few different places to get quotes and decide on a company. We sign a quote that explains that the tasks that they're going to do and the costs associated with those tasks. At the bottom, though, there's a very generic statement, which basically, for me to sum it up here, says, with projects inside of old homes, there are things you can't anticipate until the project is started. If something comes up, we'll inform you immediately and tell you the price before moving forward on any further work. Okay, this is all pretty par for the course, normal, typical of any general contractor you might work with. And of course, it's also pretty typical that things came up. The electrical in the kitchen needed more work done than we originally thought. The measurements of the cabinets weren't actually totally accurate and needed customizing, etc., etc., etc. So we find ourselves with a completely demolished kitchen space, cabinets half ready to be installed, and being presented with a sizable new price and very adjusted timeline of completion. Is any of this unusual to the general contractor who does this kind of work every single day? No, not at all. It's completely normal to them. But is it a bit shocking for the two of us? You betcha. Are we a bit annoyed and frustrated and writing our email responses to them in that tone of voice with all the frustration? Very much so. Now, let me present to you how this could have gone. At the beginning, when we decided to work with this company, they could have presented us with a handy little PDF guide or printout outlining some of the most common issues they typically see in older homes that are redoing their kitchens. This helpful FAQ of sorts could have listed a range of roughly estimated prices for what these unforeseen situations might cost a homeowner. For example, like a menu, it could have said, adjusting size of cabinet, $100 to $200 each. Additionally, unplanned outlet, $250 to $325, so on and so forth. Nothing that would lock them into an exact price since they don't quite know what the situation is, but still clear enough to give the person paying an idea of what they might run into. You see where I'm going with this, I imagine. The cost of the additional work is the same. The difference here is the communication timing. It is proactive customer experience instead of a reactive customer response. Being proactive allows your customers to feel taken care of. Settling for reactive not only leaves customers feeling uncomfortable or distrusting of you, it also makes you a bit miserable as well. Let's try bringing the examples back into the realm of the making world and ceramicists, just to make it clear. Say someone on Etsy reaches out to you for a set of new bowls. They want a lovely order of 6 new breakfast bowls in a color you have available for mugs, but just are out of stock on in bowls. Wonderful. It's something you would be happy to make. You send them over a special Etsy listing, they pay you, and you get started. But these bowls are out of stock, so you have to throw them, trim them, fire them, glaze them, and then refire them all before shipping them off to your new friend on Etsy. The customer understands that they're handmade, so they don't expect them to be shipped within a couple of days, but after 2 weeks go by without hearing from you, they are a little worried. But when 3 weeks go by, they're a bit more curious and don't forget super excited to have your bowls. So they send you a message. Hey there, maker. When can I expect the bowls to ship? You see this message and roll your eyes annoyed because you're obviously already working on their bowls and working as fast as you possibly can while also balancing a full-time job, a partner, relationship, maybe some kiddos, all vying for your attention. Not to mention the impending holidays, which means you really need to get the house cleaned before your grandmother comes over. You respond back quickly. Everything I sell is handmade, so it takes time. I'll email you as soon as I have a shipping number. And your customer is left still not quite knowing when to expect the bowls. So after a couple more weeks, they email you again. This time, you've just taken the second version of these bowls out of the kiln because the first set misfired. So you can tell them you're going to the post office tomorrow, but now you drive to the post office annoyed and frustrated, ruining your whole day because why did the customer have to contact you? Not so great, right? So let's flip this scenario into a proactive experience. You've got a message on Etsy from someone interested in ordering a set of new bowls. You send them a response back, not only with the invoice, but also with information about the anticipated timeline they can expect for a custom order. You let them know the date you will begin starting their project and that you'll send them updates as each step progresses. After the first week, you send them a picture of the bowls fresh off the wheel. They are so excited to see the process and start sharing your photos with friends who are amazed by this entire experience. When you go to glaze fire their bowls, there's an electricity short that messes up your entire firing. You were nearly finished, and now you have to start the whole process all over, delaying their order by another 3 weeks. You let them know what's happened and are so sorry that you won't be able to have the bowls to them in time for their girlfriend's birthday as they had hoped. They don't mind at all because, oh my gosh, they never realized there were so many steps to making ceramics. You managed to finish the new set of bowls in less time than you thought and send them a message to tell them you've just dropped everything off at the post office and here's the tracking number. They are ecstatic and write you a glowing review. And you now have 4 more orders for bowls from their friends who saw all the photos you sent them along the way. Both of these hypothetical scenarios technically have all the same logistics. The order is the same, but only one winds up with both a happy customer and a happy maker. Does the proactive approach take a little bit more work initially? Sure, yeah. But in my opinion, it's a lot less work in the long run rather than dealing with the emotional exhaustion of trying to change the feelings of someone who is unhappy or disappointed. Being proactive takes the tried and true saying of underpromise and overdeliver to another level. It involves your customer in the process so that they feel informed and included. And the bonus is, in doing so, there is so much less of a chance for you to ever have to deal with uncomfortable conversations or angry customers. Oof. Okay, friends, I could talk about this all day long. I feel like I'm just getting started, but I also know this is going on for a little while. So, the moral of the story here is sales and marketing don't have to be slimy. In fact, if you're selling things you truly believe in and are proud of, then there's no slime at all. And if you want to make a living from the things you make, you're going to have to come to terms with sales and marketing. Now, given we're in the thick of holiday sales season, I want to leave you with a few quick tips for smooth customer service experiences that will hopefully help you out this season. Tip number 1, remember your customer is another human, just like you want them to remember that you are. Try to strike a balance between having empathy while also not apologizing if you did nothing wrong. Tip number 2, if you find yourself explaining the same thing over and over and over again, type it into a draft email or a note on your phone. Next time you need to say it, just copy and paste and save yourself precious minutes of your time. This kind of partial automation is your friend in so many aspects of business management. Tip number 3, be proactive. Obviously, we just spent half the podcast episode talking about that. Let people know the process, and don't be afraid of saying it too many times. Just because you post about it on Instagram doesn't mean the person buying from you on Etsy ever saw that one 24-hour story post. And tip number 4, of course, the old adage is true: under-promise and over-deliver. If you think you're going to get to the post office tomorrow, tell them that it will ship in 3 days, just in case. Because let's be honest, life always happens. Okay, man, this barely scratches the surface, but I do hope it helps, not only for this holiday season, but many more sales and marketing situations in your future. If you like these businessy focused episodes, send me a DM on Instagram at The Maker's Playbook and let me know so that I can prepare a few more. And of course, if you found this helpful, I would so very much appreciate it if you subscribed and left a review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, but frankly, wherever you're listening. We're all out here playing that algorithm game together, my friends. I mentioned 2 of our free resources during this episode. To download either our photography cheat sheet or the quick guide to smart decisions, simply open up the episode description of this podcast episode on whatever app you're using and click the links in the description. Otherwise, of course, you can always just send me a DM at The Maker's Playbook and I'll send them straight to you. We'll be back to our usual interviews next week. Until then, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.